Okay, section four. I want to talk a little bit about microfinance. So this is not part of your readings in Michigan chapter four. Ordinarily, I would have given you a reading from one of my books that I wrote about microfinance. But instead of giving you piling on extra reading, I just thought I would say just a few words about microfinance because I think it's an interesting topic for those of you who are interested in economic development and the economics of the less developed world and of global poverty. I think it's an interesting conversation. I did give you, though, a reading about microfinance in your handouts. If I can share this with you here. So in the handouts I distributed, there's this article here, Your Inflexible Friend, about finance for the poor, and kind of talks very briefly here about microlending is booming and what is microlending, right? And so that's what we're going to talk about here just for a few minutes about microlending. So what is microfinance, right? What is microfinance? Well, microfinance has roughly about 300 million customers across the world, right? And is finance that's directed for people who are living close to extreme poverty. In other words, people who are living at roughly about $1.25 a day. Microfinance has some fundamental characteristics. First off, it involves group lending. So instead of lending money to an individual, you lend money to a group of people. This group then allocates the money amongst themselves. Why lend to a group of people? Well, one of the big reasons has to do with asymmetric information, right? So it's very difficult to find out information about an individual who's borrowing. But the idea here is you lend to a group, the group will know more about who is a good risk and who's not. So by lending to a group, you're actually able to reduce the asymmetric information problem. You're also more able to increase an individual's commitment to repayment, because now they're not just defaulting on some anonymous banker, they're defaulting on their friends and their neighbors. It also helps reduce transaction costs. Instead of trying to verify and follow every single individual, now you can just lend money to a group and right? You have fewer loans that you have to monitor. So that's the first characteristic of microlending, that it's group lending. Second, it tends to be progressive. And by this, I mean, you get a loan, you pay it back. Next time you get a larger loan, you pay that back. You kind of work up the ladder to qualify for bigger and bigger loans. Third, these loans usually allow for broadly defined collateral. Right, so because the poor don't have a lot of traditional capital or traditional collateral, micro lenders tend to use many things as collateral, such as pictures, family heirlooms, even kind of future crops, or these kind of things can be used as collateral, more broadly defined, so that you're more able to qualify for loans. Fourth, these loans tend to be very short term, sometimes a week, sometimes a month, right? So once again, the idea is that you get a loan, you pay it back, then you get another loan, you pay it back, and you kind of develop a reputation and develop a history of paying back your loans. Fifth, along with these loans, most micro-lending programs also tend to have an education component, right? So they tend to teach life skills and business skills to the people who borrow these loans. So when I was in Botswana, I spent some time working at a local microfinance institution called Thuthangs Basadi, right? Thuthangs Basadi would not only just give loans to individuals, but they would have once a week meetings in which people would talk about their lives or talk about challenges or how they manage money or things. And sixth, the final primary characteristic of microfinance is it primarily goes to women, right? About 98% of microfinance goes to women. Why women? First off, because women are most likely to be credit rationed, right? They are more likely to be poor. They're less likely to have collateral. They're less likely to have credit histories. They're also more likely than men to be associated with very small businesses. And so because they're more likely to be credit rationed, the idea here is lending to women is one of the effective ways of facilitating economic development. Studies have also shown that women are much more likely to use the microfinance money productively than men. Men are much more likely to drink the money away or to use it on entertainment or other non-necessities, while women are much more likely to spend it on their family and on their children. So for all those reasons, microfinance is primarily focused on women. And so as I said, when I did some work with Thethang Basadi in Botswana, these were groups of women, right, who would get together and talk about managing their personal lives, managing their business lives. How do you manage people? How do you take care of your inventory? How do you do any bookkeeping, right? And then, of course, they would get loans, and these loans would help them, get inventories together, right, and provide kind of financing for the inventories that they would sell. And then sometimes they were for things like making sure that their kids had their school fees, right, or unexpected health costs or things like that. The empirical evidence on microfinance is that it has been quite beneficial to the poor, right? That $1 in microfinance to the extreme poor has 5 times the impact as it does on the marginally poor, right? So microfinance is very, very valuable to those who are at the very, very bottom. Why does it tend to be valuable to them? It's not because it's cheaper. In fact, microfinance still tends to be pretty expensive, right? By most accounts, you typically pay about 25% to 90% for a microfinance loan. That is extremely high. However, you have to keep it in mind that that's probably at least as high as it costs to borrow money from a friend or a neighbor or from a local business person, right? So the cost of finance everywhere is very high. Why is microfinance continues to be so high? Because there's very large transaction costs, right? It's just very expensive to provide these loans to the extreme poor. Talking about in Botswana, Thethang Basadi, so Botswana is about the size of Texas, but about 3/4 of Botswana is the Kalahari Desert. And so to get to some of these little villages, there are no traditional roads. There are dirt roads that wash out in the rainy season, and you have to get in a big truck to try to get out there, and it takes time, it takes money. It's very, very expensive to provide these loans and then to monitor people. And so that's a big part of what keeps these microfinance loans still very expensive. So if microfinance is not cheaper, what is its value? Its value is because you can count on it. It's there, right? Many people simply can't qualify for finance no matter what they're willing to pay. And even if they have a local money lender or a family member, it's not reliable. It may not be there when you have a health emergency, or it may not be there when you need money to cover a school fee, or it may not be there when you need to buy inventory. And without that inventory, you can't make any money. And so its reliability is really what I think the poor find most valuable, right? And that reliability gets back to this whole phenomenon of credit rationing, right? So while the loans are not cheaper, they're available. They're less likely to be credit rationed because of the innovations that microfinance has developed, particularly in terms of group lending, right? So microfinance, I think, is it hasn't changed the world of poverty, right? It hasn't raised millions of people out of poverty, but it has made an important impact, particularly on those that are extremely poor, and moving many of those people that are in extreme poverty up to what we might call marginally extreme poverty, which may not seem like a big thing, but in practice and the everyday experiences of many people is a very valuable thing. Let me just say one last thing about microfinance, and that is microfinance today primarily works through cell phones, right? And so while here in America, most of us are not that comfortable with doing our banking on our phone. Maybe some of you are, you're a little bit younger and maybe more comfortable with doing your banking online. But in the less developed world, that's how people bank, in part because they never had bank accounts before they had cell phones. Cell phones were the first way in which they were able to get access to banks. And so many people do their banking through, traditional banks that offer online services. But a lot of how people do banking is through essentially informal networks of borrowers and lenders. The most famous of these is M-Pesa. Let me show you, write this down here if I can find. Sorry, lost my notes. Right, M-Pesa. So M-Pesa started in Kenya. Pesa is their local currency, and M is basically mobile currency, right, in Africa. And so how M-Pesa started out was that there were a lot of people who were involved in kind of informal money transfers. Let's say that you came from a village and you moved to an urban area and you wanted to send money back home. Well, what developed were a kind of a network of dealers who you could go to one of these dealers in the city and say, I want to transfer money back home. He would call up the dealer in the local village and they would make a transaction. They would essentially, through text, transfer money or IOUs to each other. And this was a way that you could send money from urban areas to the villages and possibly back. Over time, these networks got bigger and bigger and bigger, where there were thousands and hundreds of thousands of people making these transactions, so much so that many of them decided, hey, I can not only transfer money, but maybe I can make loans, and maybe you can save with me, right? So you can go to your local dealer and give them $100 and they will give you a small interest rate for it, or even if they don't give you interest rate for it, they'll save it for you. And then they can use this money to conduct loans. And so M-Pesa has actually become this really vibrant way of lending across not just Kenya, but across Africa. And even some areas of Asia have begun to use M-Pesa. And so it basically keeps transaction costs low. It keeps transaction costs low and allows people to get loans that were never able to. And it overcomes some of these key limitations of finance, right? That, lack of trust is one of the things that prevents finance. But here, because these dealers know each other and they know you, it overcomes that problem of asymmetric information. There's a lot of poor institutions in these countries created by the government, but one of the things about M-Pesa is it's largely sidestepped the government and said, we're just going to use our own networks, right? We're not going to rely on the institutions set up by government. And so it's really kind of a unique and a clever way in which people have found a way around the kind of dysfunctional financial systems that exist. Now, M-Pesa is never going to be a substitute for a formal financial system like the US has, right? There's no way that it can conduct the volume of trades and get the big loans and provide mortgages and commercial loans for significant businesses. It can't do that, but it can kind of fill in some of those most crucial needs for individuals in their daily lives, right? And particularly those people who are really at the bottom of the income distribution and who are most vulnerable to not having finance. And so, so that's microfinance, and that's a little bit about microfinance. You can, of course, read the article here that I submitted from The Economist if you want to learn a little bit more detail. But it's a good application of some of the fundamental concepts that we've talked about. Okay, that's it for day 3 here. So I am going to post on Moodle homework number 1. Homework number 1 has to do with pricing credit instruments. It has to do with the material that we learned from chapter 4 of Mishkin. So you should get on Moodle and take a look at that homework. It's really applications of the lecture that we've talked about today. That homework is due on Friday. I say at midnight because we have people from all over the world, and so it's due at midnight Central Standard Time, Iowa time. So get it in by then. It's not a particularly long homework. I think if you understood the material that we talked about today, it shouldn't take you much more than half an hour, 45 minutes. This is basically kind of a straightforward application. You can send that to me via email, right? That's probably the easiest way to do that. It's in a Word document, and so you can just put your information into that Word document and send it back to me. Okay, all the best. We'll see you tomorrow.